Last time I looked was better this or that.
No,
That mic is on and off.
it has two modes.
Last time, I don't
It
know.
wasn't necessarily better.
I'm not sure. Let's see.
All right, you'll tell me. You'll check. In the meantime, we'll get started. If I have to change it, if I have to change it, I'll change it. Okay, so we're continuing now to the second sikha that we're taking a break from the Ma'amarim for 2 weeks. Last week we learned a sikha that is very relevant to the situation now in Eretz Yisrael, where we learned in last week's sikha the quality is good. It's better than the mic, or it's the same. Where in last week's sikha we learned like this. What happened on Simchas Torah and what's happening since then is a situation that feels like a lot of darkness. And the first thing is that Yid could feel that Chas v'Sholom now the era changed. We're now in a time of darkness, and Chas v'Sholom, this darkness might have permanence. And the first thing that the Rebbe tells us is that the darkness will not have permanence because we are getting close to the times of Mashiach. And the only reason why there's still darkness, even when we're living already in the times of where we're standing on the doorstep of Mashiach, the only reason that there's still darkness even in these times is because the Seder in this world is that every revelation always comes after darkness, right? Like we learned last week that when the Eibishter first created the world, it started off in a situation of Artzei Sasoyu Vavayu V'Cheshech, and then Vayemer Elokim Yihiyah, when a child is born and he begins to learn Torah. So he starts off knowing nothing, and only as he grows older, he starts knowing more and more. The same thing with Torah. When you start learning Torah, you learn Torah Shebichsav, where you can understand anything. It says, you really don't know the dinim of Tefillin from those psukim. You have to understand it only after learning Torah Shebichsav, Torah Shebal Peh. So you start off in darkness, even in Torah itself, and then you come to light. And so too with Eretz Yisrael. It started off in darkness. The Eibishter gave it to the Goyim, and only afterwards he gave it to the Yidden. So that's just the Seder in the world. And therefore, when you see a situation of darkness, you shouldn't think, Chas v'Sholom, that this is going to be now this is the new normal. Chas v'Sholom ha'ya le'siyeh. It's going to be good. We're in the process now of receiving a tremendous new benefit and good situation in Eretz Yisrael. It's just very unfortunate that for the moment we're in the darkness, but in Mirz Hashem, very quickly we will see the new, safer and better and thriving situation that we'll have in Eretz Yisrael that will come as a result of the darkness that we're experiencing now. So that's the first point. The second point is, what are we supposed to do and how are we supposed to make decisions? We discussed that a lot of the people who are making decisions in Eretz Yisrael find it hard to do the right thing. And not only the decision makers, it's really nisim v'niflois. If you follow the surveys, and if you see what the soldiers are doing, Amcha, the vast majority of Yidden in Eretz Yisrael know what's right and what's straight. They have no doubts. They don't support, a two-state solution anymore. They don't support, ending the war. They don't support. They know. They know that in order to stay over here, we're going to have to stand strong. And the same thing, the soldiers, you see the videos that are coming out with the soldiers, the way they're standing strong and fighting and saying, please leave us here. There were a few protests that soldiers made. They were protesting that they were being taken out. They said, we came over here to fight, and we left our businesses, we left our families. These are reserve soldiers. People are already, 30s, 40s, deep into their life. And we were very happy to do it, and we are very happy to continue doing it. There's just one thing we want to do. We want to finish the job. And now over here, we don't feel that we finished the job and you're pulling us out. So some of them wrote a protest letter. Some of them hung up banners on the car, on their jeeps as they were rolling out of Gaza. So Amcha and the soldiers know exactly what to do. They're putting on tefillin, they're putting on tzitzis, saying Shema Yisrael. I mean, it's pashut, unbelievable things that we've never seen before. But unfortunately, people in leadership positions, Sai in the government in Israel and Sai in some Jewish institutions, seem not to be able to make the right decision. And the first thing that we have to know is we have to know that we are right. What do I mean? We have to know that we are right. So what's accepted right now in the world is to say like this: listen here, Yidden, listen here, Israelis. Something very wrong was done to you. It's very wrong what they did. They killed you and they hurt you and they tortured you and they acted like savages. It's not okay what they did. You have now the right to punish them. You have the right to protect yourself. You have the right maybe to get back your hostages. We'll see about that. Okay, you have the right to these things. But all of these rights are within a certain boundary, within a certain context, which is you don't really have the right to be over here in Eretz Yisrael. Okay, they shouldn't have come and killed you, but you don't really have an absolute and moral and ethical right to Eretz Yisrael. You're over here because of a historical mistake, but really a terrible evil is being perpetrated on other people, on the so-called Palestinians while you're here. And because they're stuck in this context and within the boundaries of this way of thinking, it's hard for them to make now the right decisions to say, you know what, we're just doing what we need to safeguard the Yidden. We're not going to care about what anybody else says, because they don't feel themselves that they have the right to do it. So that's the first thing. So we learned last week, in the Sikha last week, we learned that the first thing is that we have to know is that we do have the right. And why do we have the right in the absolute and unique, exclusive right to Eretz Yisrael? Why is that? Because Kol Haaretz Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu Hi, the entire world belongs to the Eibishter. Like he explained like the Rebbe explained in last week's Sikha, what does it mean that Kol Haaretz Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu Hi? Unlike the Goyim thing, that the Eibishter did create the world, but he's not aware of what goes on in the world. Even less than that, is he in control of what goes on in the world. He doesn't really care what's going on in the world. The world is really run by natural processes, by political processes, by people, by countries, by sarim, by kechavim and mazalis. So we say, no, you should know, Kol Haaretz, the entire earth and the entire universe, Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he belongs to the Eibishter. He's in complete awareness of it. He sees everything. He directs everything. He makes every decision, and it all belongs to him, and he owns all of it. And who Nisan Alanu? The Eibishter decided to give us Eretz Yisrael. The Eibishter, to whom the entire universe belongs, as its creator, who is still very much in touch with it and in tune with it, and runs it and gives it everything it has, he decided to give it to us. And that's our claim on Eretz Yisrael. And this is a claim that's not dependent on some trendy argument or movement that comes and goes. It's not dependent on other people accepting our claims or not accepting our claims. This is an absolute and complete and eternal right that the Yidden have to Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, we're fully within our rights and fully justified to do everything that we need so that we should be secure in Eretz Yisrael. That's the first thing. And this is a Sikha from Shabbos Parshas Bereishis, Tafshin Nun Aleph. So if anybody wants to look in the Sikha for more complete details, can look over there. This week we're going to learn a Sikha. Interestingly enough, the Rebbe said the next year, Shabbos Parshas Bereishis, Nun Beis. And in both of these Sikhas, the Rebbe bases his whole Torah on Parshas Bereishis, and specifically the beginning of Parshas Bereishis, which is read on Simchas Torah. In other words, on the very day when these atrocities began, that is when we read these lessons that the Rebbe is teaching us from Parshas Bereishis, which was read on that day. So we'll continue now with the second point. The Rebbe is going to come back to some of the ideas mentioned in Tafshin Nun Aleph, but only very briefly. So Al Pisa is verstanden dem Chidush in dem Pirish Chazal in Bereishis, which will Aterish Nikras Reishis, which will Yisrael Shnikru Reishis. Earlier in the Sikha, the Rebbe asks that seemingly it's a very strange thing that in the word Bereishis, which is the beginning of the creation of the world, we find that in that same word, we also have an explanation that it refers to the Yidden and the Torah who are higher than the world. In the same word, we're talking about Bereishis. Rashi explains Bereishis Brias Ha'elam, in the beginning of the creation of the world. So that's one explanation of the word Bereishis, that we're talking about the creation of the world. And another explanation that Rashi gives is Bereishis, Beis Reishis, we're talking about two things which are higher and transcend the world, the Yidden and the Torah. And the Rebbe wants to understand why in one word do we have these two contradictory concepts of the world and transcending the world in the same word. And here the Rebbe explains it in a very beautiful way. The Iker Eiftu in them, the Chiddush in this that we say that the entire that Yidden and Torah transcend the world is nicht as Torah v'Yisrael sein and Reishis be'etzem etzadatz. It's not so much that we're saying that essentially and in their true state, Yidden and Torah are Reishis that they transcend world. In ganzen Hecher for the Bria. That's a davar apashut. That's not such a chiddush. Yidden and Torah transcend the world. That's not what this pasuk is coming to teach us. Nor what's this pasuk Bereishis coming to teach us? As euch wie sie gefinnen sich in der Bria, that also the way the Yidden are found, holding Dalet, the second paragraph, that also the way the Yidden find themselves in the creation. In other words, that's physical creatures. These in them guf achumri von Yidden, until a Yid finds himself in a physical body, that also the way a Yid stands within creation, you can see in a revealed way that the entire world was created for him. You got that? Yeah. The vart over here isn't that the Yidden transcend the world. That we can know from other places. The vart in the pasuk Bereishis is that even when we have Bereishis, that the Eibishter is creating the world, and the Yid descends, his neshama comes and becomes enclosed in a physical body, also over there, you can see that the entire world was created for him, for the Yid, as a physical Yid in a physical body. And das ist der Tibach zwischen die beiden Pirushim and Bereishis, and this is why we have both of the Pirushim and Bereishis, Reishis Abriya, that Bereishis, Rashi says, is the beginning of creation. And Rashi also says on Torah, and Bereishis also refers to Yidden who transcend the world, and Torah which transcends the world. Why are they both in the same word? As das was Torah v'Yisrael zayin l'mayla mehabriya, this that the Yidden and Torah stand higher than the world. Reishis v'et achelik from the Bria atzma. Not only does this idea transcend the world, but it also expresses itself and can be seen in the world as we are created, as a Yid is put into a physical body, and as the Torah is brought down to talk about physical things. The Torah, which is the Chachma of the Eibishter, talks about Shoir and Chamoir and a Para, Shoishnagach and Shnaimach in Betalis V'chulu. Bereishis Baruchim is Shmaim Haaretz B'Pirushay HaPashut, that the Yidden also, these as the Guf HaChumri von Yisrael, until the physical and materialistic body of a Yid is Nidme B'Chumri Yusel L'Gufi Yom HaSa'ela. In its appearance, it seems to be the same to the bodies of the Goyim. And in der Darge Gufa, and in this level itself, in other words, in der Bria, the way a Yid finds himself as a physical person with a physical body, which looks similar to the bodies of all of the other non-Jewish people in the world. Here too, as is an Reishis von der Welt. Over here also, it becomes revealed how the Yidden are the beginning and the purpose of the entire world with the Pirush Hadrash, as the Medrash explains. Und der Iber is Rashi macht der Pirush Torshuni b'shvil HaTorah b'shvil Yisrael, and that's why Rashi first brings the Pirush that Bereishis means for the Yidden and for the Torah. Val nit narvas das is considered nitzu mitzias ha'elam. This that we say that the Yidden and the Torah transcend the world it's not only that it's not a contradiction to the world, nor adab in them b'shteit shleimus ha'elam atzma. The wholeness and the completion of the physical world itself is dependent on knowing this and on experiencing this, that the Yidden and the Torah, even the way they are in this world, are higher than the world and are the purpose of creation of the entire world. And this then reveals the real reason, the purpose for which the world was created, as the ganze Bria von Shemayim Haaretz, that the creation of the entire universe is only in order to bring out the greatness of the choice that the Eibishter made in the Yidden, and the greatness that the Eibishter that put into Torah. These, as in der Welt soll sich anhören bepashtas die Meile as Torah v'Yisrael sein Reishis, until within the world itself you can also appreciate and experience the greatness of the Torah and of the Yidden, that they're called Reishis, that they are the purpose for the entire physical creation. better to the andere Teilen von der Bria as compared to the other parts of the world. So in short, what the Rebbe says in Eish Dalet is that this idea that the Yidden and the Torah transcend the world is not only when they stand outside of the world, but rather it's also when they are within this world. Even when the Yidden and the Torah are brought down to a physical body and to talk about physical things, and now they no longer transcend the world. So over here, even in this state, you could see that the entire purpose of the creation was for them as physical people, as a Torah that talks about physical things. Hey, we're going to skip to Hey on the second column, page 49. Damit wird man euch verstehen, die Scheiches mit dem ersten Pirush auf Breshis, and through this explanation, we could also understand the connection to the first Pirush in Rashi of the very first Rashi on the word Breshis. That Rashi says, that seemingly the Torah should not have started with the creation of the world. Rather, it should have started with the first mitzvah in the Torah, which is the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh. Umatam pasach bebreshis mishum keich ma'asav higidlam lesesam nachlas goyim. And why did the Torah start with Breshis? In order to tell the Yidden the power of his deeds. And because of the power of his deeds, in other words, because he's the creator of the world, he now has the power within that. He now has the power to grant them the lands of the nations. In other words, he has the power to give them Eretz Yisrael because he created the world and it belongs to him. So that if the nations of the world come to the Yidden and they tell them, you are thieves, you are occupiers, you are colonists, you conquered the lands of the seven nations, the Yidden answer proudly and answer clearly. The entire world belongs to the Eibishter. In other words, he owns it as it is now. He didn't create it many years ago and then left it. He owns it and controls it and is in charge of it right now. And he created it and gave it Eretz Yisrael to those who he saw fit at that time. It was his will at that time to give it to the Goyim. And the Eibishter, in his own will, decided to take it from the Goyim and to give it to us. And that's why it's us. And that's why it's ours. So Rebbe says like this. The Chiddush in this part of Rashi, what Rashi is saying over here, why did the Torah choose to start with this idea that the world belongs to the Eibishter and not with the mitzvah? What's the Chiddush over here? We're not saying over here that Torah and the Yidden transcend the world. That's a different point, but that's not the point over here. Because that would have been emphasized in mitzvahs HaTorah, in the mitzvahs of the Torah. The fact that the Yidden are higher than the world, that we would see in mitzvahs. In mitzvahs which are given only to Yidden and not to Goyim. So and then we see, the Yidden are special. The Yidden stand higher than the world. But that's not what the Torah chose to start with. Rather, the Torah chose to start with the creation of the world, not mitzvahs. Even the way Yidden are found in this physical and materialistic world, and over there they find themselves together and in many ways equal with the nations of the world. They look similar to them. The Eibishter created all of them equally in their material state. That's been negayah to Yidden as people and to Goyim as people, and also been negayah to the earth itself. The Eibishter created the entire world and the entire earth. So there's no difference over here between Yidden and Goyim in the way it looks like from a physical and materialistic perspective. Once he's done, and therefore you can make a claim as listim atem shkvashtem goyim, that you are thieves and you stole the lands of the nations of the world. Why? Zayin dik nachlas goyim, because these lands are the inheritance of the nations of the world. But the Eibishter ben Tzayin and the son of them, and the Eibishter gave it to them. So still, nevertheless, but dorten niskala zata b'chartanu mikol ha'amim, even in such a place where it's not a place of Achedesh Elechem, it's not a place of Torah and mitzvahs. It's a place of Bara Elikim. The Eibishter created the world, the physical world, the materialistic world. Also over there, we reveal as Ata B'chartanu Mikol Ha'am, that the Eibishter chose us from amongst all the nations. And because Ata B'chartanu, because the Eibishter chose us as his nation, therefore he, as the creator of the world, gave us this land to live in. Just like the Eibishter chose the Yidden the Eibishter also chose to take the land from the Goyim and give it to us. So Abgav in Eretz Yisrael, that Eretz HaNivcher is the chosen land, Miben Kol Aratzis, to Zayin Ama Nivcher, to the chosen nation, to the Yidden. As durch dem, was Nesan Alana B'Ritzena B'Chirasei, through this that the Eibishter gave us Eretz Yisrael by his own choice. Eretz Yisrael Hagashmi is the physical Eretz Yisrael. Drikt sich eis begalui in Elam Haza Hagashmi v'Achumri. This itself expresses and shows in the physical world B'Chirasei Shel Kadosh Baruch Hu in Am Yisrael the choice of the Eibishter and the Jewish nation. Eich v'zei stein in Chumri Yisrael. Also, the way the Yidden stand in the materialistic world. If you say that, how do you see the choice of the Eibishter and the Yidden? Through Torah, through mitzvahs. So what are you going to say? Okay, this is on a Shamadika thing. Torah and mitzvahs have to do with Kedusha. So the fact that the Eibishter chose the Yidden is a Ruchnistika thing. It's not something that's part of this physical world. Dafka, when you say, no, the Eibishter gave us a physical land, the Eibishter gave us a country, a piece of earth. It's not Torah. It's a part of the creation. And the Eibishter gave it to us. Why? Because he chose us as his nation. So this shows the choice of the Eibishter and the Yidden as physical people living here in this physical world. Aklal, we're going to skip now to Zion on page 51, the first column. Aklal, what the Rebbe is saying is like this. We have to understand that Sai the Eibishter, his control extends to the physical world, and his awareness and his decision making and his ownership extends down here to every moment of the physical world. And Sai the Yidden, the specialness of the Yidden, the choice of the Eibishter and the Yidden, and the fact that the Yidden are the purpose of the whole creation extends also down here to this physical world, and primarily actually to this physical world, to the way Yidden stand over here as human beings, souls, specifically in bodies. And what's the takeaway we're going to get to our days? So Rebbe is going to start now. Zion on page 51. Al Pia now, as the Meile von Eden als der Mama Nivcher kommt is begoli euch, wir aber darf gewisse stehen in Elam Haza Hagashmi v'Achumri, that the Meile of Yidden as the chosen nation is expressed also and primarily the way they are physical people in this world. This is an idea that why is it expressed specifically the way that we are in this world? Rebbe spoke about it earlier in the Sikha. We didn't learn it over here. Because in the Neshamas, you don't see so much thing in the Bechira. It's explained in other places in Chassidus. It's Tafka in the bodies of the Yidden that you see the idea of Bechira. So we have over here something that tells us how we should behave in this world. Which is a foundation and a major concept in how a Yid is supposed to do his Aveda, and especially his Aveda when he is in the time of Golus. Since everything, the ganze Welt ist beschaffen geworden b'shvil Yisrael, the entire physical world was created for Yidden. Und das kommt ereis eich b'elam haza hagashmi v'achumri in der Muvan v'charta b'guf achumri von ha'eden hanidme b'chumri yisrael gufi ha'elam. And this is l'gufi umis ha'elam. This is also expressed in the physical world. The fact that the Eibishter created the world for the Yidden is also expressed in the world, the way we stand in the world. Is verstandig as in jeder Maimon de Matzav. So we can understand that in every situation and in every condition. B'chol zmanu, b'chol makom, at every time and in every place. Afilu, in other words, in a matzav chumri b'yeser, even when we find ourselves in a very materialistic and corporal situation. In other words, afilu in zman hagolus, even in the time of golus when we can't see any of the spirituality that we were able to experience in the times of Beis Hamikdash and certainly in the times of Mashiach. Nevertheless, still even in this time, stein Eden bedagas reishis, the Eden stand at the level of reishis, hecher von alle Sachen, we stand higher than all of the other things in the world, On the contrary, bishvilam nivra hakel. Everything in this world was created for the Yidden. Zayin dik dem ama nivcher in welchem dem Eibishter beicher gewen. Since we are the chosen nation, and whom the Eibishter chose, and if it's negeya to the goyim, we could also tell them, but in their bechira is nit shaykh ken shinui, that in the choice of the Yidden by the Eibishter, there's no change. We're still the Eibishter's chosen nation. When somebody makes a choice, it's beyond being changed. We're not talking over here about a random choice. We're talking about bechira, the way it's explained in Chassidus, that it comes from the deepest part of the person, a choice that he made because that's what he wants, not because of anything else, and therefore he'll never change it. This is what he wants. And then it clarifies. If the Mila of a Yid, that he transcends everything, and that he's the primary purpose for creation, would only be expressed in the fact that the Yid's neshama is higher, and in the Mila of his characteristics, of his behavior, so you could have said that when do we say that the Yidden stand higher than the world? In a time when the neshama is expressed in a revealed way. But not in the time of Golus, when the neshama is hidden, when the neshama does not express itself and cannot be seen. Means man Golus. But David says, "We bald up as uvanu b'chartum kolam v'loshin hu agufa chumne anidme b'chumne yisul gufa yom esaylam is the bechira da alamo." But since the choice of the Eibishter and the Yidden is a choice in their physical bodies, so therefore this choice is true always and at all times, even when you can't see the neshama. So the fact that Yidden stand higher than everything else in the world is also true to Yidden in this world as human beings. Therefore is verstandig, so from this we can understand that even when Yidden find themselves in a time of Golus, and when they find themselves to be under the subjugation of the nations of the world, because of our sins, we were exiled and we had to leave our land, and now we're under the subjugation of the nations of the world. Even though because of this we cannot see how the neshama is very high and transcends the world, still the physical and materialistic body of a Yid is in a condition of reishis, that it is the highest thing that exists within the physical world, and that it is the purpose of the creation of the entire physical world. Why? Because of the Eibishter's choice in the body of a Yid, and the Ibir is moving, and therefore it's self-understood as nit nervous Eden sein in dem und nitach das Schlitt von Elam chas v'shalom. That not only are the Yidden not under the rule and under the control of the Goyim chas v'shalom, nit nor mitzad zeir neshamas. In other words, David's going to explain this later. We're not only saying this that their neshamas, their souls, aren't under the control of the Goyim. Also, our bodies are not under the control of the Goyim. Full stop. And even more than that, we are even higher than the entire creation, or the beginning of the entire creation, and the purpose of the entire creation. And it's for the Yidden that all the nations of the world were created, and that the entire world itself was created. And therefore, you can understand, if this is the reason that all the nations of the world were created, we are certainly not under their control, because we stand higher than them. And we stand higher than the world itself. These, as the Gavas from the Masa'elim is Gartali and Yidden, to the extent that we can actually see, and it makes sense, that's actually the opposite. The greatness of the Yidden, the greatness of the nations of the world is actually dependent on Yidden. Kedeisa, like it says, the Mitzvah Rebbe says this based on the Medrash and the Gemara and the Zohar, as bechol deir u bechol zman, in every nation and in every generation and in every time, Umma sheYisrael tachtam, the nation under whom the Yidden live, begolus misnases al kol hagoyim, becomes a superpower, becomes the strongest nation in the world. Like we see now that America is the superpower. As in Golus gefinnen sich Yidden in Shibud Malchus, and even though we see in Torah, it says clearly that the Yidden find themselves subjugated under the nations of the world. That's what it says in Torah. Hatem tzivu from dinah de malchus dinah. We are commanded by Torah to follow the laws of the land. That if the nations of the land, if you have a dictator coming up with random laws, you don't have to listen to him. But if there's a proper lawful government that creates laws that are fair and equal, so you have to follow them. And also says, we should not rebel against the nations of the world. And it says, we shouldn't pick a fight with the goyim. And there are many other Mamar Chazal about this, about how Yidden should conduct themselves in a time of Golus. So you would think that this seems to be saying that we are under the control of the goyim, that we do have to take what they say into consideration. It says there have a klal uklal not. Is there time if them need their five Sidin haben a made of a pachad for elam bisman Golus chas v'shalom. The reason for Chazal telling this to us is not because we are afraid of the goyim, and we're saying all of these things so that they shouldn't chas v'shalom hurt us, and so that we should be able to have the things that we need. V'rum adrab. Eden zayin b'chinas reishis, because the opposite is true. Yidden are the beginning and stand in front and stand above everything else. Vas b'shvilam nivra elam, for whom the entire world was nivra ha'umas elam, for whom the nations of the world were created. So they certainly don't have control over us. So why do Chazal tell us all of these things? For the same reason that the Eibishter told the Yidden when they were coming towards Eretz Yisrael that we shouldn't fight with Moav, we shouldn't instigate a war against them, and we shouldn't bother them. And something similar also when it gets to the nation of Ammon. Why did the Eibishter tell this to us? Because we were afraid of Moav, because we were afraid of Ammon, because the Eibishter Chas Shalom was afraid of them. As das is nicht kiluvi and eitz teva. No, Chas Shalom. It's not if it's good advice. So leave them what's eating that from they made haben. That since the Eibishter knows that we should be afraid of them, so the Eibishter is telling us to leave their kayach, that because of their power, and because we need their help, because we need their support, so therefore don't start a war with them. Don't bite the finger that feeds you. Chas v'shalom, that's not why the Eibishter told us not to start with Moav or with Ammon. Narvi says mefurish in pasuk that time. The pasuk itself tells us the reason. I will not give you an inheritance. I will not give you any part of their land, says the Eibishter. Because I gave this area to the descendants of Lot. Moav and Ammon are the nations that come from Lot. Das heißt, in other words, as the Eibishter eingestellt im Seder, that this was the Eibishter's decision over here, as Kashem vi b'ritzayin in the son of Lanu, that just like the Eibishter gave us Eretz Yisrael, as is b'ritzayin in the son of Lehem, Artzes Ammon and Moav. The Eibishter gave the lands of Ammon and Moav to them. So therefore, the Eibishter is telling us, don't instigate a war and don't try to conquer their lands, because this was mine, the Eibishter's decision. That's the whole point over here. And so too, to not picking fights with the nations of the world, and the fact that we have to listen to the laws of the land, as das is nitzli pachat chas v'shalom. It's not because of fear. It's not because we're under their control. It's not because we need their support. Nur weil der Eibishter hat eingestellt und angesagt, as a Zayt of Zayin Seder B'zman HaGolus. But rather because in the time of Golus, this is how the Eibishter wants us to behave. We're not afraid of them. We don't need them. They can't hurt us. Nevertheless, it's Golus. And in the time of Golus, the Eibishter said that this is the way it should be. You should accept what the Goyim say in very certain and specific areas. Aber es ist muvon upashat, as das riert klal nicht an, das was Eden sein und ich bis meine Golus, der Mama Nivcher, reishis von kol ha'elam v'kol umas ha'elam. That even in the time of Golus, the Yidden are the beginning and the reason for everything, and the reason why even the Goyim were created. This haste and thereby clarifies and makes it crystal clear in case we didn't get the point. As neis if lezevas din de machus din is nur beneget zu gewisse inyanim gashmim, and in addition to the fact that the statement of din de machus din that we have to abide by the laws of the land is in the first place only about some very specific physical things. Din mominus, the laws of property rights and things like that. Misim varnenis v'kayetzim, taxes and fees and assessments and things like that. Aber nit beneget zu inyanim von Torah und mitzvahs in welchem not a klora ira in Torah, but not beneget to things, to matters of Torah and mitzvahs in which we have a clear lesson given to us in Torah, and as stated by the Frierdiker Rebbe, unsere Neshamis Hotman in Golus nit vertrieben, that our neshamas were not put into Golus. In other words, in matters of Torah and mitzvahs, we were never put into Golus and Shibud Malchus Nitibur gegeben, and we weren't subjugated to the nations of the world. What would you think? What do we always understand this to mean, the Frierdiker Rebbe? But our bodies, yeah. Yeah, this is the way we always understand it. When Frierdiker Rebbe was going from Kastrama, from Spalerke to Kastrama, and he had a few hours over there in the train station, not a few hours, he had a few hours to get ready and go on the train, and he was told that no, he's not allowed to talk to anybody other than his immediate family, and people aren't supposed to gather. And of course, the Chassidim came to the train station, and over there, after being threatened with his life and the whole ordeal that he went through in Spalerke, in prison, the Frierdiker Rebbe got up and made the statement that you should know, he's telling the Yidden that our neshamas were never put into Golus, and therefore we should fight for Jewish education, for educating our children dafka in a Jewish way and raising them as Jews, and continue fighting for shuls and mikvahs and things like that, because our neshamas aren't in Golus. But our gufim, you would think, it sounds from this, our gufim is what's in Golus. And over there they could hurt us. But they can't stop us from learning Torah and doing mitzvahs. That's the way we always understand it. Says the Rebbe, no, that's not the right way to understand it at all. Is eich, wenn get to the gufim and gashmis v'chumnius v'naid, bleibt allemol reishes. Also, when get to the guf and the gashmis of a yid always remains a reishes, that he stands on top of everything and not under the control of everything. What then did the Frierdiker Rebbe mean is when get to the gufim? Und das was dinner de malchusa dinner, this that we have to abide by the laws of the land, is nit der Fall, was is tachas shibud memshelos u'maselim. It's not because we're under their subjugation and we're under their control. They could govern us, they could tell us what to do. Nor weil azay hat der Eibishter eingestellt, the Seder in Golus. But rather that the Eibishter set up the system in Golus that we should get things through the Goyim and through the nations of the world, and that we should live in a place where the laws of the land, where we should follow them. In other words, the neshamas, bichlal, the Eibishter didn't put into Golus. And the gufim, yes, was put into Golus, but what does it mean that the body of a Yid is in Golus, that a Yid finds himself in Golus? That the things that the Eibishter gives him comes through the Goyim, like we'll see in the next paragraph. But not chas v'shalom that he's under the control and that he's dependent in any way, shape, or form on the goodness and on the goodwill of the Goyim. Chas v'shalom, like we'll see. From this we can understand also benegat to the kindness that we receive through the nations of the world who behave appropriately in the time of Galus. And therefore we're supposed to say, give thanks to the nations of the world who support us. As Yirmiyahu tells the Yidden when they're going into Galus, that they're going to go to a foreign land, to a foreign capital, and that they should beseech the peace of the city where they will be because through the peace of the city, in other words, if everything will be good for the Goyim, you will also have peace, things will be good for you also. As das is nicht, weil Eden darfen ankommen zu der Chasadim Chas v'shalom. It's not because Yidden are dependent and need the kindness of the Goyim. Chesed le'umim chatos. The kindness, the pasuk says clearly, the kindness of the Goyim is a sin. Nothing good will come out of the kindness of the Goyim. And when we get kindness from the Goyim, which help us to perform Torah mitzvahs, is das nicht chesed le'umim. It's not the kindness of the Goyim, because that's chatos. That can't have anything to do with Torah and mitzvahs. Nor chesed from the Eibishter. It's the chesed and the kindness of the Eibishter that we are receiving. But says mamshich zu Yidden durch u'masa'elam, which the Eibishter gives the Yidden through the nations of the world. Weil azay will der Eibishter, soll sein der Seder bisman azeh, u'b'meil is das nit chatos chas v'shalom. Because that's what the Eibishter wants. The system should be in Olam Hazeh. Okay, so what do we have from Zion? From Zion we understand that since the Yidden as physical beings in this world are the reason why the entire world was created, that we are not dependent on the nations of the world for anything. We are dependent only on the Eibishter, even in physical matters. Never mind when we get to Torah mitzvahs, but even when we get to our physical safety, we're dependent only and exclusively on the Eibishter, and everything that the Eibishter tells us to do in the time of Golus and gives us as vis-a-vis listening to the laws of the land, and as far as that we receive our things through the Goyim, it's not because we're dependent on them, it's just that this is the Seder that the Eibishter wants in the time of Golus, that he gives us our things through the Goyim. But it's the chesed, like the Rebbe says, the chesed from dem Eibishter. It's the Eibishter's kindness. It's not the kindness of the nations of the world. And if we needed any illustration of this, we could see that, as we'll soon see weiter in the Sikha, but something very new happened after the atrocities of Simchas Torah, that the nations of the world, the Goyim, expressed support from the Yidden in an unprecedented manner, in a way that perhaps we haven't seen throughout history, that the Goyim should run to the support of the Yidden in a way that we haven't seen, and we'll soon see in the Sikha perhaps why we've seen it this time and we haven't seen it earlier. But together with that, what do we see now? What are the Goyim doing? You know, they had their month, their 6 weeks maybe, in the good case, of supporting it. And a lot of people are trying to understand this. Why? It was like a flip-flop from the Goyim. At the beginning, they all came and they supported us and they were giving us whatever we need. Say that, but before lunch, the Goyim are behaving differently now. So it looks like it's a change. It's not it is a change and it is a contradiction. But in the beginning, they were behaving that way because we're getting closer to Mashiach. But in the end of the day, Goyim are self-interested. This is chesed lumim chatas, and therefore we're dependent on them. And we're not dependent on them. We're dependent on the chesed of the Eibishter. We'll skip now the beginning of Ches. And we'll start from the second to the last paragraph on page 53. Shleimer as the Gil von Niflois ba, dikt sich euch eis in der Gil von Bchiratz shel Kadosh Baruch Hu in Yidden. The Rebbe said in the two paragraphs that we skipped that we're starting to see in the world a behavior in the years of Nun Aleph and Nun Beis, and it's self-understood that it continues till now also, that in the world itself we see a miraculous turn of events and a miraculous way of being in the world, and also the choice of the Yidden, Eibishter and the Yidden is also becoming more apparent in the world. How do we see the Bechira, the choice of the Eibishter and the Yidden in a more apparent way in the world? So that illustrates it with a few cases. Like we saw already in a revealed way, the miraculous wonders in the beginning of this year. This is talking about Nun Beis, in addition to the miracles that happened in Tafshin Nun Aleph. This is all in 1991. The Miyuchad B'Kasher Midam as Medina Ahi Rusland Lastereis Eden Lastereisen is Messiah Teisenter Eden Sa'ilazan Eretz Yisrael, that Russia is allowing, and not only allowing, but is even helping thousands and thousands and even hundreds of thousands of Yidden to go to Eretz Yisrael and to go to other places where they can live in full and Freiheit b'chaim apratim, where they could live in complete freedom when it comes to their personal lives, which this is their gilif von ma'alasim shal Yisrael ba'efen as eichum esa'elam zayin in dem makir Messiah. So this reveals the mile of the Yidden, that also the nations of the world, such as Russia, recognizes and acknowledges the mile of the Yidden, and therefore they were helping them to go and move to another country where they will be able to be free to lead their lives the way they wish. As the Gili v'hakara ba'elam and von umas ha'elam in ma'alasim shal Yisrael v'et nischazik midoir l'doir. This recognition of the Goyim in the mile of the Yidden becomes strengthened as the generations pass. Kumendik, why? Kumendik als nennt zu der Gula mitzvah shlema, since with every generation we become closer and closer to the final and ultimate redemption, to Mashiach. Wenn es wird mekuyim werden dem v'holchu Goyim la'erech v'hoyim lachem umnayich v'soriseyim unikasayich, which in the times of Mashiach, the way of the world will be that the Goyim will follow the light and the example of the Yidden, and the nations of the world, not only the nations, the kings of the world will be the caregivers and the nurses of the Yidden. When al-Sachanul is that, so therefore, as a preparation to this time of Mashiach, when the nations of the world will all serve the Yidden, is b'meshech haderis eichin zman hagalus. So as the time passes, even while we're still in galus, gefindt man as a fil umas ha'elam haben makir given as Yidden zayin dem am hanivra. We find that even the nations of the world recognized and acknowledged that the Yidden are the chosen nation. Can be seen in several Midrash Chazal. And as it's also known as that the good nations of the world call the Yidden in their own language. Even when they talk amongst themselves, what are the Yidden called? The chosen nation. So this is something, the Maila of the Yidden is something that's recognized even in the time of Galus, even by the Goyim. And this is a process that's increasing. And in them is zugekommen nachmer b'deiros achareinim, and in this recognition of the Goyim of the Maila of the Yidden, and that they are the purpose of the entire creation, it's becoming increased in the later in these recent generations. And specifically and especially in the United States of America, and other countries, which is a country of kindness, a land of kindness. Was lost, a nation of kindness, was lost, which allows the Yidden to do their work of serving the Eibishter in peace, in spiritual peace, and in physical peace. And not only that they allow us to do what we need to do to serve the Eibishter in peace, they even help us and they help the Yidden in Eretz Yisrael. And this is added, we see this even more in the more recent generations, in recent years, and especially in the last year from when David said the Sich Shnas in place, when Chila Shana Zu Shnas in place, but when he gets it, there had to be when you see you off in Medina B'nei Yisrael, as we see what was going on in Russia, Canal, like David mentioned earlier, that the nations of the world are showing support for the Yidden in ways that haven't been seen before. As der derech b'chol zeh is durchgebrochen geworden durch die Puls von Gedolei Yisrael b'meshech haderis b'tumas ha'elam, that this was all brought about and accomplished through the work of the Gedolei Yisrael throughout all the generations with the nations of the world, ub'miyuchud from Rabbeinu Nisienu, and specifically and especially through the work of our Rabbeim, unevendig from dem Alten Rebbe, beginning with the Alter Rebbe, v'chat sich gemischt in Inyan ha'elam, who got involved and took a side and took a position and saw through different things and different decisions in this world when you get the things that were going on in the world. Von Alexander ibn Napoleon as is known, the Frierdiker Rebbe's work, not only Beruchnis but also Begashmius, he sent spies and other support that he gave to the Tsar, to Alexander, the Tsar of Russia, to win over Napoleon for the benefit of the Yidden Beruchnis. That now, through the big work of that the Alter Rebbe started in Russia, where he caused that Russia should bring about a benefit for the Yidden Beruchnius, which that's all that was possible then in his times. Slowly it evolved and developed. The benefit of the Yidden also came out from that country, also physically. What we saw happen in Nun Aleph and Nun Beis, that Russia started helping the Yidden in matters of Tena and Mitzvahs and in leaving Russia and going to Eretz Yisrael, David says, was a result of the Alter Rebbe working with Russia and breaking through to the nations of the world, and specifically in that case to Russia, that the Yidden are the reason for the entire creation, and therefore Russia will win the war because it's to the benefit of the Yidden. And that slowly reveals it in the entire world. As in them soll zukommen nachmer and nachmer beifen von Moshe v'Heilig v'Eir. So now we're in a process now where the nations of the world themselves recognize and acknowledge that the purpose of the entire creation and who's the most important thing in the world is the Yidden. And therefore they start with their behavior to support the Yidden. Like I mentioned earlier in what happened on Simchas Torah this year, we saw a very unusual thing where so many countries from the United States, England, Italy, Germany, and other countries, many other countries, came out with such strong statements of support for Israel in ways that we haven't seen before. During every tzara for the Yidden, the natural thing was that the Goyim always went and piled on and made trouble for the Yidden. And we see that even though in the beginning they showed the support, but now they reverted back to their self-interested and selfish behavior, where it's hard to say that they're supporting us too much. Still supporting us, but not as much as we saw. But still, that moment that we saw where the world came out for the support of the Yidden, we didn't see it in the Holocaust, for example. In the Holocaust, they just, whatever. ignored it, and if anything, aided and abetted what the Germans were doing. And over here, we're seeing a different Seder. We didn't see it in the War of Independence. There was barely any support for the Yidden. They had to go and find weapons on the aftermarket from Czechoslovakia, from different barely functional countries. They went and they bought the old stocks of weapons from World War II. In the Six-Day War, we didn't have help. In the Yom Kippur War, we didn't have help. America finally sent what do they call it? The airlift, the air train. I forgot what they called it. But they did it only after the Yidden suffered tremendously, and so too in all the years afterwards. And over here, there was something different, where all the nations of the world, or the majority of the civilized world, came and stood by the Yidden and said, we support the Yidden unequivocally. And Bepastus, this is something that happened as the process, what the Rebbe is saying, that we're getting closer and closer to Mashiach, and therefore the Yidden are, the world and the nations of the world are acknowledging the righteousness and the fact that of the righteousness of the Yidden, and the fact that they are the most important thing and therefore should be given precedence. So V'yiratzin, says the Rebbe, as in dem soll zukommen Nachmer and Nachmer be'efen von Meisif ha'heilig be'oir, that we should see this type of thing happening more and more in a way of increasing light. These as on the spatel werden alle Hagbolis in der Spaß Chesed zu Yidden und in Hakaras Ma'alasim Shal Yisrael und in Zeder Beiles Eretz Yisrael, until all of the limitations and the boundaries that exist of the granting of Chesed to the Yidden and of the Goyim acknowledging the Maila of the Yidden and the fact that they are the owners of Eretz Yisrael. Which every Yid, even in the time of Golus, has a portion of Eretz Yisrael. In accordance with what Rashi says in the beginning of Parshas Bereishis, that the Eibishter told his nation that he created the world and he chose to give them the land of Eretz Yisrael. So that if the nations of the world come to the Yidden and tell them that you are thieves, that you have conquered the lands of the seven nations, they answer that the entire world belongs and is under the complete ownership and control of the Eibishter, who he created it and gave it to those who he saw fit. It was his will to give it to them, and it was his will to take it away from them and give it to us. And this, I'm not sure what the Rebbe is referencing over here. There's obviously something that had some kind of a conference. The nations of the world announced in these recent days as the Eretz Yisrael, that Eretz Yisrael, and specifically Chevin, belongs to Yidden, belongs to Yidden. Wie es steht in Torah, as it says in Torah, in Bible, that's what's written in the Bible, that they also consider it to be a holy book. And now the Rebbe brings out the point in the strongest terms, to what people are saying now, and how we have to make decisions in Eretz Yisrael, and what the right way of thinking of our decisions have to be with the situation in Eretz Yisrael. Which is to say that most of the decisions that are to the disadvantage of the Yidden, for example, giving our enemies food and fuel and support and other support, and not fighting full force and pulling back and holding back and not using the full firepower of the Israeli army, and pausing the fighting and going slower and starting conversations with them to say maybe we're going to stop over here for 2 months if you do this, if you do that. All of this talk, which is the complete opposite of how you win a war. What's driving all of this on a practical level? What do people say? Why are we doing all of this? And this is not a secret. It's said clearly in so many articles and in so many statements from the politicians. Why are they doing it? Because in order to fight a war, we need the support of the world. We need, what do they call it? I forgot what they call it. It doesn't really matter what they call it. But we need a certain merchav. We need a certain area in which we could maneuver in the world And therefore, in order to maintain the support of the world, we have to give our enemies, the army that is shooting against us, we have to give them fuel so they could keep their generators going, so they could keep their tunnels inhabitable, because without electricity, they can't stay in the tunnels. They need ventilation systems and electricity. So we need to give them fuel to our enemies, because without that, we won't have the legitimacy from the nations of the world, because they'll say this, that, or the other. And therefore, we have to give them the quote-unquote humanitarian support, knowing fully well, like was just published recently, that 60%, over 60% of the fuel and food that enters into Gaza is taken by Hamas right at the border. They see them, they go on the trucks, they take it, and they use it for their own needs. And the decisions to pull out so much of the Israeli military from Gaza, and so many other decisions, and the decisions to bomb less intensively and less aggressively and put our own soldiers at risk, and also just slow the entire pace of the operation, and the decision to hold back so far from conquering the last remaining city in Gaza that hasn't been touched yet, which is Rafiq, which is on the south. The reason for all of this that's given and that we're told is very clearly and unequivocally. We need the legitimacy of we need to have legitimacy in the eyes of the nations of the world, so that they shouldn't sanction us, so that they shouldn't take us to court, so that the United States should supply Israel with weapons, so that Egypt shouldn't declare war against Israel. Those are all the reasons that are given. In other words, we're under the control and we're dependent on the nations of the world. And because of that, Eretz Yisrael has to leave over 100,000 of its own citizens out of their homes. I think it's 80,000 citizens had to leave the different cities and villages along the border on the north, and another many tens of thousands had to leave from around the area of Gaza. And here we are, 4 months after this event, and they're not fighting. They're not fighting to win, at least. And the over 100 hostages that are still there, and they barely have, they have a tiny portion of the military currently actively fighting in Gaza, and even the part that's there is not fighting full force, because they believe that they need the Americans, and they believe that they need the legitimacy in the eyes of other countries in the world. Says the Rebbe that this is completely untrue and abgefragt. There's no place for such a thing. How much, there's absolutely no place, and it's impossible, and it's out of the question. What somebody said lately in Eretz Yisrael, that was referring to over here to a certain Fruma Yid and a Charav, who made a statement at that time in Eretz Yisrael, as Yidden in Eretz Yisrael darfen sich untergeben zu der Lachatz von Umas Ha'elam, that the Yidden in Eretz Yisrael have to acquiesce and give in to the pressure of the nations of the world, bekasher mit Eretz Yisrael, in connection with matters of Eretz Yisrael. Then it was about the negotiations in Madrid and the Oslo, which eventually led to the Oslo Accords. So leave al tiskara b'umas, because of what it says in Torah, that you shouldn't instigate and pick a fight with the nations. This is what this person is claiming. They find themselves under the control of the nations of the world, and are dependent on the kindness of the nations of the world. And this person went even further, as the Hatzalah and Kim von Eden in Eretz Yisrael is given, that he credited the salvation of the Yidden and the success of the Yidden, he credited it to the Goyim. He says the only reason why we were able to be victorious in the past is because the Goyim supported us, and therefore we have to be controlled by them and basically do what they say. This is what this person was a from Yidden Acharav said, and this is what's being said today by so many people. And there's many Yidden and even from Yidden who believe it, who believe that Taka, Israel doesn't have the freedom of doing. You could walk down the street and talk to people. So when I get to the first point, that Eretz Yisrael belongs to us, that any from a Yid knows clearly. We have to explain it to our Yidden who are not yet Shemer Teinu Mitzvahs, to our brothers and sisters who are not Shemer Teinu Mitzvahs. But from a Yidden at least know this, that Eretz Yisrael, the Eibishter gave it to us, that the Eibishter is in charge of the whole world. That from a Yidden know. But this thought that we're dependent on the support, the military support, the diplomatic support, that the United States blocks, it uses its veto power on the United Nations Security Council to stop things that would be damaging to the Yidden, and that we're dependent on it. And that if Chas v'Shalom they would stop, we wouldn't find a way to survive. This is assuming that they could even stop. That's the point of the Rebbe, that we will get our support in the time of Golus through the Yid, through the Goyim, no matter what. And even if they don't give us our support, we'll be victorious anyways. So erstens, first of all, Rachman litzlan zu sagen, as der Kiem von Eden is besafik, Rachman litzlan hoya l'siyah. Heaven forbid to say that the existence of the Yidden is Chas v'Shalom under doubt and under threat. Am Yisrael is Nitzchi, the Jewish nation is eternal. Wie bald ist es einem dem Eibishter's Volk und der Eibishter ist Nitzchi. Since we are the Eibishter's nation, and he is eternal. Like it says in the pasuk, like the pasuk says clearly that I, the Eibishter, have not changed. In other words, I am eternal, and therefore you Yidden haven't been annihilated. You are also eternal. So that's the first thing, to have a little perspective, and not to feel that we are under the danger of anything, and therefore we must listen to what the Goyim say. There's no danger to us. We could do what we need to do. There's no danger to us. We are eternal. Zweitens, jeder Id weiß bepashtas as the Aschalo Psich von Kol HaTorah Kula is Bereshis. Every Yid knows how the entire Torah starts, and that is with the word Bereshis. And Rashi says, and Rashi is if the Mefarish B'Shvil HaTorah Shnikra Yisrael B'Shvil Yisrael B'Shvil HaTorah Shnikra Reishis B'Shvil Yisrael Shnikra Reishis. That the Yidden and the Torah are both called Reishis, that they precede and they stand above everything in the world, and that the entire world is created just for them. Is verstandig bepashtus mamash as nit elam seine balabais if in Nachman. So if that's the case, it's easy to understand that the nations of the world are not bosses; they have no control over the Yidden. Das ist die Haschalo Psich von ganz Torah, and since this is the beginning and opening of the entire Torah, seit Torah shebichsav and seit Torah shebalpeh. Das is Kelo Kol Mashatamid Vasik Asid Lechadish, which Torah Shebaal Peh includes everything that a well-learned student will say. Die Torah, was ist gelernt geworden und zugekommen bei jedem Meshach Kol HaDoros, ist verstandig als Bereshis, B'Shvil HaTorah Shnikras Reishis, und B'Shvil Yisrael Shnikra Reishis is a Yesod B'Chol HaTorah Kula, that it is a foundation in the entire Torah. In other words, even in the Torah, to the Torah that we understand in today's day and age, the way we learn Torah today. The Lamnesa, and nevertheless, notwithstanding these two facts, that the Yidden are eternal, and that the Yidden are not under control of the Goyim, because the entire world was created for the Yidden, and this is also expressed in this physical world. Untersteht sich Haid zu machen sein bepumbi lifnei kama v'kama series Yisrael. A Yid stands up before many tens of Yidden, was eine gekommen Herren Torah, and they came over there to hear him say, to teach Torah. As der Kiem von Eden is tali and umasayla, that the existence of the Yidden is dependent on the nations of the world. Die Pliebe dabei ist noch stärker gekommen, die Kitzter von die Yamim Tovim und Chedesh Tishrei, wenn Eden haben gesagt, kamen Pamim, as in their tefillas, ate v'chartanu mikol ha'amim. And especially at the time that this person said it, which was after the Yidden finished saying during the month of Tishrei so many times, on Yom Tov, in the Nusach of davening, we say, Ate v'chartanu mikol ha'amim, that the Eibishter chose us. It's such a simple thing that the Yidden are not dependent on the Goyim for their existence, for their safety, for anything. That we wouldn't even think that you have to negate it, that you have to make this case even. And especially that to explain this to a Yid, even a Goy understands this. As even the nations of the world recognize and acknowledge that the Yidden are the chosen nation. And throughout the generations, this was an obvious thing. That even in the times, in the generations when there were many concealments and a lot of darkness, like in the times of the Enlightenment movement, Rav Smicha never would have stood up to say such a thing, that the Yidden are dependent on the nations of the world. Thirdly, in Gimel, Die Teile von Altis Gare Beumes und die Chassadim, was beim Bakum von Israel, that we're not allowed to instigate a fight with the Goyim, it says in Torah, and that we receive our good, our kindness, through the nations of the world, that we receive things through the nations of the world, has nothing to do with the current conversation of whether or not we have to listen to the Goyim and that they can control us. From says move on as altiskara beumes rit chas shalom klal klal nit on dem bereishis b'shvil Yisrael and dem atav chatanu kum dubelel, because it's obvious and it's understood that we're not supposed to pick a fight with the goyim in the time of Golus is because the Eibishter said that we shouldn't, not because now we're in a situation that the Yidden are beneath and controlled by and dependent on the goyim. So in other words, it's misunderstanding what it says in Torah, Al Tiskara Beumes, and that the hashpah to the Yidden comes through the Goyim in the time of Golus, to equate that, to saying that therefore we are dependent on them and we have to listen to them because we're under their control. That's wrong. It's just that the Eibishter gives us things by his decision. The Chasadim of the Eibishter, he decides what to give us and he gives it to us, whether or not the Goyim want to give it to us. He gives it to us through them. He makes them give it to us, and that's the end of the story. The Eid Ve'ikr. And the above points are even more true when it comes to the question at hand. The question at hand is verstandig bepashtus, as wenn es setzt sich wegen Kiyum HaTorah and Mitzvahs, when it comes to a matter that relates to the fulfillment of Torah and Mitzvahs, which is the current question. The question of the safety of the Yidden, like we'll see in a moment, the question of how to protect the Yidden in Eretz Yisrael and what to do, is a matter of Torah and Mitzvahs. Is if dem nitshach zagen al tiskara v'chulu. Over here, Chazal never said in the first place al tiskara, that we should chas v'shalom go against Torah and mitzvahs with the excuse that we can't start up with the Goyim. We see throughout Jewish history, whenever there was a situation from the time of Purim, when Mordechai didn't say al tiskara b'umis, Mordechai said Torah and mitzvahs is what we're told to do by the Eibishter. That's what we'll do, even if the nations of the world are threatening us with annihilation. This is not what the Yidden ever did, not at the time of the Yevonim, in the time of Hanukkah, where they said that they made Gzeiras on Bris Milah and Kiddush HaChedesh and Shabbos and Limud HaTorah. The Yidden didn't say it says Al Tisgara B'umis, and the Chasadim of the Yidden come through the Goyim, and the Hashpahs for the Yidden come through the Goyim, and therefore we have to listen to them. They didn't. Why didn't they? Weren't they going against Torah? The answer is obvious. Torah says Al Tisgara B'umis, and Torah says that we get our things through the Goyim only when it's not a contradiction to Torah and mitzvahs. When it's a contradiction to Torah and mitzvahs over here, Al Tiskara B'umis doesn't apply. We no longer listen to the Goyim, even if it means contradicting them completely. How much more so in our situation, where it's not just a small detail in Torah and mitzvahs, which we know there's no such thing as a small detail in Torah and mitzvahs, but still there are things that are bigger. Where we're talking about endangering the lives of Yidden by returning territories to the Goyim. And as we see clearly what Torah says about this, as Shulchan Aruch clearly paskins, as Nachrim Shetzaru ala Yaris Yisrael, that Goyim who besiege cities of Yidden, if they're coming with the intent of killing, of murdering, and even if they still didn't come, they're still in Lebanon, they're still in Gaza. Yeah, they went back after Simchas Torah. We kicked them out. Now they're still in Gaza, so they didn't come. But we know that what's their intention? Sitting over there in Lebanon, sitting over there in Gaza, and sitting over there in Iran. What's their intention? Their intention is they plan on coming and killing Chas V'Shalom Seinei Yisrael. What does Shulchan Aruch say? Yitzim aleim b'klei zayin. You go out preemptively in war against them. Umechalalim aleim, it's a Shabbos, and you're allowed to be mechalal Shabbos because it's pikuach nefashis. And ubeira smucha l'sfar. And if we're talking about regions that are close to the border, afilu einan reitzin lavei ela aliske kash v'teven. Even if they're saying that we're not coming to murder, We're coming over here as friends. We want to trade. We want to buy things. Or we're coming regarding a small dispute, but we're not chas v'shalom. We're not coming to murder. What does the din say? Mechalin aleinas Shabbos. You mechalel Shabbos. You go out with your armies to confront them. Why? Shema yilkadu ha'ir, because since we're dealing with a border region, we are afraid and we're concerned that they might conquer the city. And from there, they will be able to continue and conquer the rest of the land. Therefore, it poses an imminent and severe danger. And Teda says that you go on in war against them. So it's very clear to us that when we have Goyim who threaten the safety of Yidden, Teda says that we have to go and preemptively fight against them and fight with the full force. And therefore, there is no room at all to try to apply and to say al tiskara b'umis and to think that we are dependent on them and therefore we have to listen to their pressure and give in to their demands. Chas v'shalom, we have our Torah, the Eibishter supports us, and the Eibishter will give us everything that we need, whether or not we do what the Goyim say. David says many times that in order to make it easier for us to understand, to accept what it says in the Torah, because sometimes when it says in the Torah, it's hard for us to agree with it, because it could go against what we think that we perceive and sense in the world and experience. So over here, to me, it's very obvious how we see that this is the way things work. What was Israel's greatest military victory ever? And one of the greatest military victories in the history of war was the Six-Day War. The Six-Day War. The Yidden conquered an area that was over three times as large as itself in a matter of 6 days, with as many soldiers that were killed, but still it was very small numbers compared to what should have been. And it was just the victory was beyond anything anybody can understand. Different generals that went after the war, they went for further study in different military institutions in England and in other places, would describe how everybody all of the military specialists of all the other countries just couldn't understand how such a thing was even possible. So it was the greatest victory. How did Israel accomplish it? Without the support of the Goyim at all. There was no superpower. America wasn't giving Israel weapons then. France barely sold Israel a few fighter jets. The tanks that the Israelis were fighting with were old models, the Centurion, and still can't remember the name of the other model tank that they had, were all the Sherman. They had the Sherman tank from the times of World War II. It went out of service shortly after World War II, somewhere in the late 40s, and this is in the late 60s. And numerically, they were at a disadvantage. The Arabs had more tanks, more artillery pieces than the Yidden had. And we didn't have the support of the Goyim. And we didn't listen to the Goyim. The pressure was coming from America that Israel should not strike preemptively. And we went and we did it. Just like the Rebbe says in this Sikha we should do. And what was the result? What was the outcome? The greatest victory for the Yidden, and something so miraculous that the entire world was shaking from seeing it. The Yidden in Russia were dancing in the streets under communism and singing Am Yisrael Chai and other songs expressing their pride at being Yidden, and the government didn't even stop them. The world was in complete shock. And what happened afterwards when the Yidden started listening to the pressure of the Goyim? They gave in to America when it came with the Milchemet HaHatashah. What's it called? The war of attrition in Israel. America pressured Israel between Israel and Egypt. America pressured Israel to sign a peace treaty, or not a peace treaty, but a ceasefire with the Egyptians. And under the guise of that ceasefire, the Egyptians moved all of the missiles up close to the border. And then when the Yom Kippur War started, the Israeli Air Force wasn't able to support the ground forces, and there was a terrible things happened as a result of that. And so we had, and also Golda Meir, the Prime Minister of Israel, was adamant to not strike first, even though there was already a good 12 hours where they knew that war is going to be started. But in order to not upset the Americans, who let Israel know under no uncertain terms that if they strike first, they will come out against Israel. So in order not to do that, they didn't strike preemptively. Had they struck preemptively, the situation would have been entirely different in the Yom Kippur War. And subsequently, we could keep going through case by case. The amount of Yidden, Rahman al-Litzlan, that were killed since Israel gave in to the Oslo Accords, to the pressure of the United States, and signed the Oslo Accords, and is many multiples of times the amount of Yidden Rahman al-Litzlan who were hurt before that. So we see clearly, the Eibishter made it easy for us to see that when we don't take into consideration the pressure of the Goyim, because we know that the Eibishter is the one who is supporting us, and that the Goyim have no control over us, and we will have everything we need, whether they want to or give it to us or not. Either they'll give it to us, the Eibishter will force them to give it to us if that's what needs to happen, or the Eibishter will miraculously save us if that's what needs to happen. Whatever needs to happen will happen, and we will win. So it's easier for us to accept this, what the Rebbe is saying, and see that that's actually the way things run. The Yeratzin says there, that he, and we could add that all of the people today who are saying the same thing should retract what they're saying, that the Yidden in Eretz Yisrael are dependent on the support of the Goyim and therefore have to give in to the pressure of the Goyim. I feel David HaMelech, and even David HaMelech said and admitted to his mistakes. As men so bechlal nit darfen reden in shel seiner Seine in Yanim und wir kann alle haben reden nur beschwachen und lassen so kollechet mit Israel, that from here going forward we should only be able to talk about the praise and the greatness and the beauty of all Yidden, including those who until now maybe were saying things that they shouldn't have been saying. Und beim Yuchad, especially durch them, as there's eine Meisif in Limud HaTeirah became a mitzvah scale beim Yuchad, and especially through this that Yidden are add in the study of Torah, especially in the limit of Shura Chitas, Rashativ Tevis Chumash Til Imtanya, which the Rebbe is mentioning over here, Karagal Lahaskin and Dems Mavim and Hypton Learn Torah Tichlas of Simchas Torah, that the Rebbe is ma'ered to learn Chitas. The Eidvu Oike, as is also coming in der Akara B'chol Elam Kel Be'umas Elam in Malasim B'Shivcham Shal Yisrael. Maybe that the entire world should come to the situation where they recognize the Maila and the praise of the Yidden, that Bereshis B'Shvil Yisrael, that the entire world was created, this physical world was created for the physical Yidden, on Eretz Yisrael gehert zu Yidden, and that the land of Israel belongs to the Yiddish, to the nation of Israel, to the Yidden, bis Shleimus Hagili B'zeh, until we'll come to the complete revelation of this Begula Mitzvah Shlema, when Eretz Yisrael will yet be expanded, and may it be now in our times.